I never thought I'd see him again. Not after all these years, especially not at our 20-year high school reunion, of all places. But there he was, standing by the punch bowl like he hadn't aged a day, and for a second I almost wondered if I was dreaming. I'm talking about Jason, the guy who was the center of my teenage universe, and honestly, the reason I spent most of high school pretending to be okay with just friends. Back then, he was the captain of the football team, all charming smiles and effortless cool. And I was the quiet kid who sat 2 rows behind him in biology class, too afraid to say more than a few words. We had a brief moment in senior year, an awkward kind of friendship that nobody really understood, but then life happened, and we drifted apart without a trace. Fast forward 20 years, and here I am, standing in the old gymnasium of our high school, surrounded by familiar faces and faded memories. The place smells like a mix of sweat, cheap air freshener, and nostalgia. I'm sipping on a plastic cup of something that tastes like flat soda, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I wasn't sure why I even came. Maybe I wanted to see if anyone actually remembered me, or maybe I was just curious if Jason would show up. Turns out, he did. And not just as the same guy the first remembered. There was something different about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on right away. He was still tall, still had that easy grin, but the way he looked at me when our eyes met, it wasn't the same friendly recognition I expected. It was something softer, more searching. I caught myself staring longer than I should have as he made his way across the room. My heart started doing that ridiculous teenage thing again, racing, skipping beats, all the stuff I promised myself I'd outgrow. I felt like I'd been hit by a wave of memories I didn't even realize I'd been holding on to. When he finally stopped in front of me, he smiled that slow, familiar smile that used to make my stomach flip. "Hey," he said. Like there was a whole conversation waiting behind that one word, and just like that, the reunion wasn't about reconnecting with a bunch of old classmates anymore. It was about Jason. About us. About what we never said back then, and maybe what could still be said now. But there was one thing I noticed right away. Something in his eyes that told me he wasn't the same Jason I thought I knew. Because the way he leaned in, the way he spoke, it was clear. He wasn't straight anymore, and that changed everything. "Yeah, I'm not," he said, like that was the easiest thing in the world to admit. Not straight anymore. I blinked, caught off guard by how casual he sounded. Like he was telling me the weather forecast, and not something that, back in high school, I'd have been too scared to even think about. "Okay," was all I managed to say. My throat felt dry, but the gym suddenly got quieter in my head. He laughed softly. I know, that's a lot to just drop on you, but I felt stupid not to say it. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it all. Part of me wanted to ask a million questions. How, when, why? But another part was just happy to hear the truth, finally spoken out loud by the guy who'd haunted my thoughts for years. "So what happened? When did this happen for you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. Jason shrugged, leaning against the table. "I guess I started figuring it out a few years after college. It wasn't like a switch flipped overnight. It was slow. I met someone, who made me realize I'd been lying to myself for a long time. It felt strange hearing him talk about it so openly. In high school, any hint of that kind of thing was met with whispers or worse. But now, here he was, standing in front of me, no apologies, no shame. I wish I'd known back then, I said, surprising myself with how honest I was being. Maybe things would have been different. He looked at me, eyes soft. Maybe, but we were kids. We didn't know better. Hell, I think I was scared of myself. There was a pause, a long one, and then, for the first time, I reached out and lightly touched his arm. It wasn't a bold move, more like a tentative question. And to my surprise, he didn't pull away. "Can we talk somewhere quieter?" he asked, glancing around the noisy gym. I nodded, and we slipped out of the reunion together, stepping into the cool night air. Outside, the world felt a little more real. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the hum of distant traffic filled the silence between us. We found a bench by the school's front lawn, and Jason sat down, running a hand through his hair again. "I never thought I'd come back here," he admitted. "Not just to the reunion, but to face all this, the past, the memories. It's weird." I nodded. "Yeah, it is." We sat there for a few minutes, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. It was comfortable, like the quiet between old friends who knew there were things left unsaid but didn't need to say them right away. Finally, Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was always scared you'd hate me if I told you the truth." "Hate you?" I laughed, the sound a little breathless. "Why would I hate you?" "Because you were straight," he said, voice low. "Because I thought you'd see me differently. Or worse, not see me at all." I shook my head, disbelief creeping in. "Jason, you're the last person I'd ever hate. And honestly, I never stopped thinking about you." He looked up at me then, and there was something in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or something deeper that made my chest tighten. "Really?" he said. "Yeah. I kept telling myself it was just a crush, or that I was imagining things. But it wasn't. You mattered. Still do." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile again, the one that made everything else fade away. "God, I'm glad I came tonight." "Me too." Because in that moment, sitting on that bench under the stars, it felt like maybe this story between us wasn't over after all. Maybe, just maybe, it was just beginning. We sat side by side on that bench, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Something about the quiet outside the reunion, the distant sounds muted and the streetlights casting soft glows, made it easier to talk, or maybe just be ourselves without all the noise and eyes. So, I said after a moment, trying to shake off the nervous buzz that had been building since Jason admitted he wasn't straight. "What are you up to these days? Besides surprising me." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck like he was a bit rusty at this conversation. "I work in graphic design now. Moved back here a few years ago after living in the city. It's quieter, and honestly, I needed to slow down." He glanced at me, eyes bright. "What about you?" I told him about the job I'd settled into, editing for a small publishing house. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and let me work from home most days. Easy to hide behind a computer screen when social stuff got overwhelming. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. There was a beat of silence, and then he said, "You ever dated anyone since high school?" I hesitated. It felt like such a loaded question, especially with everything hanging between us. "A bit, but mostly it was me pretending to be someone I wasn't, or trying to convince myself I was." Jason gave me a knowing look. "Me too. I spent a lot of years pretending. It hit me then how much we'd both been carrying around all that uncertainty and shame in our own ways. Suddenly, the past didn't feel so distant anymore. It was like we'd both been wrestling with the same stuff, just in different corners. I said, "I always wondered why you never gave me a chance. Or maybe you thought I wouldn't want one." His smile softened, and he reached over to nudge my shoulder lightly. "I thought you were happy." "You seemed happy." I laughed, a little bitter. "That was a show. I was trying to keep up appearances, Jason looked down, fiddling with the rings on his fingers. "I'm sorry if I made it harder for you back then. If I wasn't clear." "Don't be. You were figuring it out yourself, just like me." I looked at him, really looked. The lines on his face from the years, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, it felt familiar and new all at once. We stayed like that for a while, talking about where life had taken us, the mistakes, the small victories, and the moments we wished we could redo. There was an honesty between us now that felt like both a relief and a kind of reckoning. At one point, Jason said, "Do you think it's weird that after all this time, sitting here with you feels like coming home?" I nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I feel the same way." I wasn't sure whether it was the nostalgia or something more, but the way he looked at me then, the vulnerability and the hope, I realized I wanted to see where this could go. No more pretending, no more holding back. "You still have my number, right?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah, I do. But maybe it's time you used it." He grinned, eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "I was hoping you'd say that." We stood up together, the night suddenly feeling full of possibilities. As we walked back toward the school, side by side, I felt like I was finally stepping into something real, something I'd been waiting for without even realizing it. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. Walking back into the gym felt like stepping into a completely different world. The noise was louder now, the crowd thicker, and the energy buzzing with the kind of awkward excitement only high school reunions can muster. But somehow, none of it fazed me anymore. I had Jason beside me, and for the first time in years, it felt like the rest of the world could just fade away. We ducked back inside and drifted toward the snack table, the glow of the fluorescent lights casting a strange, almost surreal sheen over everything. Jason grabbed 2 bags of chips and tossed one my way. I caught it, and for a moment we just stood there, eating in companionable silence. "I can't believe it took us 20 years to talk like this," I said, laughing quietly. "Better late than never," he replied, his eyes glued to mine. I wanted to say so much more, but the words tangled up inside me like nerves. Instead, I asked, "So do you think this is just a one-time thing? Or, maybe we try to see where this goes?" Jason shrugged, but the smile he gave me was full of something I couldn't quite name. "I'd like to find out." That was all the encouragement I needed. We found a quieter corner near the bleachers, away from the crowd, but still close enough to hear the distant music, the chatter, the occasional burst of laughter. It felt intimate, like a secret world carved out just for the two of us. So, I said, trying to break the tension, "What was it like figuring all this out? Your close sensuality?" Jason exhaled slowly. "Honestly, terrifying. For the longest time, I told myself it was just a phase or a mistake. I thought if I admitted the truth, everything would fall apart. My friendships, my family, even my own sense of who I was." I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Same here. I spent years pretending, dating women, trying to fit into a mold that never felt right. "Did you ever think about telling me?" he asked quietly. Every fiber in me wanted to say yes, but the fear I'd felt back then was still fresh in my mind. I was scared you'd reject me, or worse, that I'd lose you. Jason reached out and covered my hand with his. "You won't lose me now." His touch sent a jolt straight through me, and suddenly, all my walls came crashing down. I squeezed his hand back, feeling a warmth spreading through my chest. We talked for hours, or at least it felt like hours. We shared stories about the awkward first dates, the moments of self-doubt, the small victories that gave us hope. It was like peeling back layers of ourselves, finally revealing truths we'd buried deep inside. At one point, Jason looked at me with a softness I'd never seen before. "I always thought I was alone in this, that no one else from our world would understand." "Well," I said, smiling, "I'm here, and I get it." He laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that made my heart ache in the best possible way. "So what now? We have to pretend we didn't just have the most intense conversation of the night when we go back inside?" I shook my head. "No way. I want people to see that Jason and we're here and we're real." He looked nervous, but there was determination in his eyes. "You ready for that?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I am." Together, we stepped back into the crowd. Heads turned, whispers spread. But honestly, I didn't care. Because for the first time, I was standing next to the person who mattered most, with nothing left to hide. As the night wore on, we danced awkwardly to songs we both pretended to hate, shared stories and laughter, and tried to make up for lost time. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of hesitation, of uncertainty, but it was ours. When the reunion finally ended, we walked out into the cool night, reluctant to say goodbye. Jason stopped me just before we parted ways. "Can I see you again? Like, really see you?" My answer was immediate. "Yeah, I'd like that." He smiled, his hand lingering on mine for a moment longer. "Me too." That night, as I lay in bed replaying everything, I realized something important. Sometimes, life circles back in the most unexpected ways, giving you a second chance to be honest, to be brave, and maybe, just maybe, to find love where you thought it was impossible. And with Jason, I was ready to take that chance. The next morning, I woke up with that weird mix of excitement and nervousness that feels like butterflies, but also a bit of dread. I kept replaying the night before in my head, Jason's smile, the way his hand felt in mine, the conversations we shared. It was like waking up from a dream you weren't sure was real, but you desperately wanted it to be. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from him already waiting. Simple, just, Morning. Coffee later? I grinned, fingers trembling a bit as I typed back. Definitely. What time? We agreed to meet at that little cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, but it had good coffee and quiet corners, perfect for talking without shouting over blaring music or crowded spaces. When I got there, Jason was already at a table by the window, scrolling through his phone, looking casual but somehow more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He stood up when I walked in, and the way he smiled made my heart skip. "Hey," he said, voice soft. "Morning." "Morning," I replied, sliding in across from him. We ordered coffee, and for a moment, neither of us said much. The easy silence was different from the charged energy of last night, but just as comforting. "So," I said finally, "how's it feel being back here, back with all of this?" He sighed. "Honestly, a little surreal. Seeing everyone, old friends and memories, it brought up a lot. But mostly, it reminded me of what I was too afraid to admit for so long." I nodded. "I get that. I spent years convincing myself I didn't feel what I felt." He reached across the table and took my hand again, warm and steady. "I'm glad you didn't give up. That you're here now." "Me too," I said, smiling. "It's weird though, like I always thought we were from two different worlds back then. I never imagined this would happen." Jason's eyes softened. "Maybe we were just waiting for the right time." We talked for hours about everything and nothing. About our jobs, our families, the small disappointments and unexpected joys life had thrown our way. But underneath it all was this growing sense that whatever happened before, whatever fears we'd had, didn't have to define what came next. At one point, Jason mentioned how he'd come out to his family a few years ago. It wasn't easy. Some of them struggled with it. But eventually, they got there. It took time, but they loved me. I could see the pride mixed with vulnerability in his voice, and it made me realize how much courage it took for him to be where he was now. "Have you told your family?" he asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not yet. I'm still figuring out how to say it without making it a big drama." Jason smiled. "Hey, you've got time. No rush." Later, we left the cafe and wandered the streets, the spring air fresh and a little chilly. We stopped at a park bench, and Jason pulled me close, resting his head on my shoulder. It felt like coming home, the kind of comfort I hadn't known I'd been missing. "You know," I said quietly, "I can't believe how much I wanted this back then. And now, here we are." He looked up at me with those big, honest eyes. "Yeah, it's kind of amazing, isn't it?" I nodded, heart pounding. "It really is." Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more. Every meeting peeled back a layer or two. Stories, fears, hopes. We learned about each other's favorite movies, the music that made us feel alive, the little quirks that made us who we are. And, slowly but surely, the old walls I'd built around my heart began to crumble. One evening, Jason invited me over to his apartment. It was cozy, filled with art and plants, the kind of place that felt lived in and loved. We cooked dinner together, laughing over my terrible attempts at chopping vegetables, and shared a bottle of wine, the conversation flowing as easily as the laughter. Afterward, we sat on his couch, the city lights twinkling outside the window. He reached out, fingers brushing mine, and I felt that familiar jolt, electric and terrifying all at once. "I'm really glad we found each other again," he said softly. "Me too," I whispered. And then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle at first, uncertain, but then it deepened, full of everything we'd both held back for so long. It felt like the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Jason rested his forehead against mine. "So what do you think? Is this the start of our new story?" I grinned. "I think it has to be. Because after all those years of silence and fear, the truth was clear. Sometimes life gives you a second chance, and you just have to be brave enough to take it." The days that followed felt like we were living inside some kind of surreal bubble. Every text, every call, every stolen moment together pulled me further out of the fog I'd been in for so long. It was like breathing fresh air for the first time after being underwater. Jason and I started carving out routines, Weeknight dinners, lazy Sunday mornings with too much coffee, and even more talking. I was amazed at how much we'd missed, not just about each other, but about life itself. It was like we were rediscovering the world through a different lens, one colored by honesty and hope. One Thursday evening, after dinner at his place, we sat on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline was dotted with lights, and the air smelled faintly of rain on pavement. Jason pulled his jacket tighter around him and looked over at me. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about coming out to my parents again. Not just me, but us." My stomach flipped. It was one thing hearing him talk about his personal journey, but now we were talking about bringing me into the picture in a way that felt big, real, and terrifying all at once. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded. "I think I am. I want them to know you. I want them to know us." I swallowed hard and met his gaze. I want that too, but I'm scared. What if they don't get it? What if they don't get me? Jason reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm and steady. "We don't have to do anything until you're ready. But I want you to know I'm here, for everything." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the coming out, or the fear of rejection. It was about finally having someone who'd stand with me, no matter what. The next few days were filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. Jason was patient, never pushing, just offering a steady presence I didn't realize I needed so much. Then came the moment I never thought I'd see coming, an invitation to meet his parents. They were coming to town for the weekend, and Jason wanted me there at dinner. "Are you okay with that?" he asked when I hesitated. "I think so," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I want to meet them. I want to see where this goes." The night of the dinner arrived, and my stomach was doing somersaults. Jason's apartment felt like a calm before the storm, but as soon as we stepped into the restaurant, all my nerves came rushing back. Jason's parents were warm and welcoming, but I could tell there were questions unspoken beneath the surface. They were polite, asking about my job, my interests, but I knew the real test was yet to come. At one point, Jason's dad caught my eye and smiled. "So Jason tells us you two go way back." I nodded. "Yeah, we did, and now we're trying to figure out what's next." His mom reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. "We're happy if you're happy." Those words felt like a lifeline. I glanced at Jason, and his relief was palpable. The dinner went on with more stories, laughter, and careful glances that told me everyone was trying to find their footing in this new reality. Afterward, Jason and I walked home in the cool night air, hands brushing until I finally took his. "That went better than I expected," I admitted. He smiled. "Yeah, it feels like the start of something good." But as we got closer to his building, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister. "Mom and Dad want to talk. Call me when you can." My heart sank. I hadn't told my family yet, and suddenly it felt like the moment was rushing toward me whether I was ready or not. Jason squeezed my hand. "I'm here, whenever you're ready." That night, I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, trying to find the courage to make the call. A million thoughts swirled, fear, doubt, hope, but beneath it all was something new, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to hide anymore. With a deep breath, I dialed my sister's number. "Hey," she said, sounding calm but serious. "Hey," I replied, my voice shaky. "We're all here," she said, "whenever you want to talk." I closed my eyes for a moment, then started telling my truth. And just like that, my new story was beginning to unfold. Messy, uncertain, but real. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't alone. The call with my sister lasted longer than I expected. She was patient, asking gentle questions and sharing stories about Mom and Dad, how they'd always been traditional in some ways, but also loved me fiercely in their own, sometimes clumsy fashion. When I finally told her I'm gay, it felt like a weight had lifted, but also like I was stepping off a cliff into the unknown. "We love you no matter what," she said. "And Mom and Dad want to hear it from you. They might be surprised, but they love you. You're their kid." Her words were reassuring, but my stomach tightened at the thought of telling my parents face to face. I wasn't sure when or how to do it, but knowing they were open to listening was the first step. I hung up and stared at my phone, heart pounding, and immediately sent Jason a quick message. I told my sister, "Feels like a start." His reply came almost instantly, "I'm proud of you." That simple sentence made me want to cry. I wasn't used to having someone in my corner like this. The next few days were a blur of emotion. I found myself rehearsing what I wanted to say to my parents, trying to anticipate their reactions, grappling with the fear that things might not go as hoped. Jason was a rock through it all. He showed up with coffee when I needed it, sat with me during awkward family dinners, and never once pressured me to rush. One evening, we took a walk through the nearby park. The late spring air was cool but fresh, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. "I know this isn't easy," Jason said, slipping his hand into mine. "But I believe in us, and I believe in you." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I'm scared, though. What if they don't accept it? What if I lose them?" He stopped walking and turned to face me, eyes steady. "Then we face it together. But no matter what, you're not alone." That night, I finally worked up the courage to call my parents. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I started, voice trembling. "I have something important to tell you." There was a pause, and then Mom's voice came, warm and a little shaky. "We're listening." I took a deep breath and told them, as simply and honestly as I could, that I was gay and that I'd been afraid to say it for a long time. Their silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, and my heart raced. Finally, my dad spoke. "Son, we don't fully understand this yet, but we love you, always." Mom added, "You're still our boy. We just want you to be happy." Tears prickled my eyes, and I smiled through them. "Thank you. That means everything." Over the next few weeks, my relationship with my parents slowly shifted. There were awkward moments and questions, but also conversations filled with love and attempts to understand. Throughout it all, Jason was by my side, cheering me on, holding me when I needed it, and reminding me that love, in all its forms, was what mattered most. One afternoon, as we sat on Jason's couch, he looked at me with a mischievous grin. "You know, we've come a long way since that reunion," I laughed. "Yeah, who would have thought?" He reached over and pulled me into a hug. "Here's to us. To second chances and new beginnings." I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't always easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But with Jason beside me, the past didn't feel so heavy, and the future felt bright, full of possibility, love, and the promise of being true to myself at last. Looking back, it's wild to think about how much has changed since that night at the reunion. Jason and I went from two people carrying years of silence and fear to a pair who learned to lean on each other for support and strength. It took time, more than I thought I had, and a bunch of awkward conversations with family and friends. But it was worth every uneasy moment. One afternoon, a few months after I came out to my parents, we found ourselves back at that same park where we'd taken those long talks about fear and hope. The air was warm, the trees finally fully leafed out, and the sun was setting in this soft, golden way that made everything feel kind of magical without trying too hard. Jason looked over at me with that quiet smile he's perfected, a smile that makes me feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. "Remember when you told me you were scared you'd lose your family?" I nodded. "Yeah, that was one of the hardest parts." He took my hand and squeezed gently. "But you didn't lose them, and you didn't lose yourself." That hit me harder than I expected, because in so many ways, that was the whole point, wasn't it? Finding the courage to be honest, even when it's scary, and trusting that the people who truly matter will still be there. I looked around, the kids playing near the pond, the couples strolling hand in hand, and then back at Jason. "I'm glad we took a chance on this. On us." He leaned in, just enough for me to feel his breath. "Me too." No grand declarations, no fireworks. Just that quiet, steady feeling that comes with knowing you found something real, something worth holding on to. When we walked home that evening, it wasn't just about the past or the reunion or even the coming out. It was about the here and now, two people who'd found each other again, ready to build whatever comes next together. And honestly, that feels like the best kind of ending there is.